Welcome back to the new SEC podcast. We have another week of football in the books. We have 2 weeks left to figure out who's going to be in the SEC title game. I know a lot of sites are looking at the playoffs. A lot of these teams at the top of the SEC are already in that projected playoff bracket. We'll see the updated one come Tuesday. But there's a lot of questions going on online around what does Alabama need to still make it to Atlanta for the title game? What does Georgia need? What does Ole Miss need? Does Texas A&M control their destiny? They do. But what we're going to do is look at these 4 teams and figure out what they need to do to get to that game. I've seen a lot of discourse around this online about the win and loss that they need. Where the SEC is interesting is you're also looking at common opponent win percentage, and that's where we're really going to get in depth today. Because if you didn't know, the Kentucky-Vanderbilt game is one of the biggest games as far as these standings are concerned for the rest of the season. So we put together not only the scenarios, we put together this cheering guide that I'll break down more in depth as well, that will tell you a little bit about, if you're a fan of one of these 4 teams, who you need to win in the next 2 weeks. Now, Texas was on this when we did the video last week. A lot of love for that video, so appreciate you guys tuning in. Texas, after the loss to Georgia, has been eliminated from contention. You have 4 teams left: A&M, Alabama, Georgia, Ole Miss. So let's start with the team that's in the driver's seat, the number 1 in the SEC right now, 10-0, coming off of a crazy win, the biggest comeback win we've seen in a while. Texas A&M beating South Carolina. They have 1 SEC game left, and that is going to be against Texas. So for Texas A&M to make it to the SEC title game, they have 2 options. 1, they either win that game against Texas, or they're cheering for both an Auburn win versus Alabama and a Mississippi State win versus Ole Miss. They need both of those 2 things to happen should they lose to Texas. Right now, Texas A&M, interestingly, per ESPN FPI, is only the 3rd best percentage team to win the SEC. I think maybe there's a lack of confidence coming out of that South Carolina game about how they looked in the first half. But Texas A&M, you're in the driver's seat. There's not a whole lot to talk about here. But when you look at the final week of the season, get your Auburn, get ready to watch the Auburn game, get ready to watch the Mississippi State game. You are cheering for those 2 teams who will both be at home to win those games. If that happens, you're in regardless of what the week 14 result is. Where Texas A&M, it's interesting. A lot of conversations have been around, do you even want to be playing in this game? Because Texas A&M right now, number 3 in the country, I don't think that will change. I personally think that they should be higher, a 2 or even a 1 based on the strength of their record. You're playing in the SEC title game. It's a guaranteed bye. I don't know how far they would drop a team like A&M should you make it all the way there, undefeated, losing the title game, if you end up losing that bye. If I'm A&M, let's keep winning. Let's get an SEC title, beat Texas. Of course you want that. Go to Atlanta and beat one of these 3 teams. That's what Texas A&M wants here, but 2 paths to make it. Moving on to another team here that had a heartbreaking loss this week, Alabama. They were the other team in the driver's seat when we did this video last week. It was A&M and Alabama. You control your destiny. You don't need anything to happen. That is no longer the case for Alabama. Their path to the title game in all 4 scenarios requires beating Auburn. You have to do it in Jordan-Hare. It's going to be a crazy environment. It's a game where a lot of wacky stuff happens. So aside from that, what do you need? 4 different ways to get there. 1, if Texas beats A&M, that's one way. If Mississippi State beats Ole Miss, that's another way. Now we start getting a little bit tricky. These other 2 ways are that 4th tiebreaker I talked about, where it's around opponent win percentage. When you're looking at opponent win percentage, you're in a 3-way tie with Alabama, Georgia, Ole Miss. The head-to-head doesn't matter as much because of them all being equal, and Alabama having beat Georgia beating Ole Miss, so Alabama doesn't own, the tiebreakers are all funky there. So now you're looking at opponent win percentage. Vanderbilt beating Kentucky is one of the biggest ways for Alabama to get there. That's a week 13 game. It's coming up this weekend. Another one to keep an eye on is Tennessee beating Florida. If Tennessee beats Florida, then all Alabama needs is either that Vanderbilt win or even a Missouri win at Arkansas could do it. Now, those are the 3 games to keep an eye on if you're an Alabama fan. You're cheering for Tennessee, which I know I'm an Alabama fan myself, and I don't like to do it, but it's who we're rooting for this weekend when they play Florida on the road. You have Vanderbilt beating Kentucky, and then you have Missouri versus Arkansas as an opponent that Alabama played, already having a pretty strong foundation as far as the opponents that they've played being in the upper half, of the SEC, having played Georgia, having played Vanderbilt, having played Tennessee, Missouri. You didn't play those Arkansas, Mississippi State teams. You do have South Carolina on there. Almost getting a big win that would have boosted Alabama's resume as well. Looking at these Alabama games, though, that is what you're cheering for. Alabama right now, the second best percentage to win the SEC per ESPN FPI. We'll see where they sit in the bracket for the playoffs. If they're sitting at 10, if they're sitting at 11, 9, I think the big conversation is around where do you put them in relation to a Notre Dame or a BYU. That's a conversation aside from the SEC title game. This is just their path to get there to Atlanta, which would guarantee them a spot should you win in Atlanta. Most likely, whoever wins that game is going to get a bye. I don't, see that being any other way because all of these teams still will have a pretty high rank. Let's look at Georgia. Huge win against Texas, 35-10. Dogged them at home. Interesting thing with Georgia's done with SEC play. There's no more SEC play for Georgia this year. So now they have to sit back and watch and see what happens here. There's no more controlling a game. They play Georgia Tech as their final game of the season. So you're watching 4 different scenarios. It's really an inverse of the Alabama ones because you would be really competing for that spot with Alabama if A&M continues to win. 1, Auburn beating Alabama. Auburn beats Alabama, Georgia, punch your ticket, you're in, because then you have a tiebreaker over Ole Miss. Number 2, Texas beats Texas A&M. You now hold the tiebreaker over A&M, common opponent, win percentage, all of that. Georgia, you're in. Now we look at the inverse of the Alabama games. If you're a Georgia fan this weekend, you are cheering for Florida. You are cheering for Kentucky. You are cheering for Arkansas to beat Missouri. Those are the things that will diminish Alabama's opponent win percentage and then continue to propel you to that spot. Finally, a Kentucky win versus Vanderbilt and an Arkansas win versus Missouri together would do it should Tennessee not be able to beat Florida. So that's what you're looking for. There's a whole bunch of decimal points and numbers and percentages that are behind this. We put the link to the scenario planning website in the bio. I highly recommend going and checking that out, playing with what games could potentially happen so you can see specifically what could put Georgia into the game, what could keep them out. We ran a bunch of different scenarios, and this is what we got. If there's anything that maybe we missed, let us know. I think this controls it all based on the common opponents here. Now we'll look at the last one, Ole Miss. Ole Miss took care of business against Florida this weekend, continue to stay in the hunt. They're right there, kind of on the fringe. They need a lot of crazy stuff to happen. There's only one way that they can make it, and it is if they beat Mississippi State on the road, Egg Bowl game, if Texas beats A&M, and if Auburn beats Alabama. In that scenario, they will be playing Georgia in Atlanta. That is the only way that Ole Miss can get there is by playing Georgia in that game. It's not super, super likely. Crazier things have happened. I mean, A&M didn't look necessarily super strong against South Carolina. Alabama didn't look very good against Oklahoma. And I think, this Ole Miss team has every right to feel confident in beating a Mississippi State team who has been struggling for the better part of a few years now. It could absolutely happen. Again, looking at this list, we'll look, briefly again at the cheering report and, who you want to be rooting for this weekend. Have it all laid out here. Be sure to screenshot this, send it to your friends. If you're an Alabama fan, send it to your Alabama fan friends or Georgia, whatever it may be. So, when you're looking at games for the next 2 weeks, who could help you get there. I know, again, talked about it, who wants to play, who doesn't want to play, all of this and that. It's a way to get an SEC title. It's always a coveted prize no matter what's going on with the playoffs. These 4 teams likely will all make it anyway, barring another loss for Alabama. And, the other 3, I think, are sitting in a pretty solid spot either way. Get that, get the win, get the bye, most likely, and then you find yourself in a good spot to continue on into the playoffs. So, again, a lot of discourse out there about this. Most of the answers I'm seeing online are just kind of breaking down who you can win and who can win, but they're not looking at these other games that could also help win percentage, such as the Kentucky, Vanderbilt, Tennessee, Florida, Arkansas, Missouri. So this is the first time I've seen it is by running these numbers. So, be sure to like, subscribe. We do this every week. We do game previews talking about these 4 teams, the rest of the 16, total 16 teams in the SEC. So be sure to hit the subscribe button. Don't miss out on that. Love making content like this. Again, I'm Hunter Zeisman, new SEC podcast. Until next time.